I Hate Politics is a podcast about a human activity we love to hate. I'm Sunil Dasgupta. As we stand this July 4th weekend at the precipice of the end of the American experiment, the big picture pervades our minds. But on this show, we've done something else. We've looked at the world through a worm's eye view. And in keeping with that perspective, this episode, I talked to historian, cartographer, and graphic designer David Ramos about his project to rediscover Washington, D.C.'s lost streams, the countless waterways that constituted and contributed to the making of the literal swamp on which the national capital was built. As Washington developed and grew, and as it is true of other cities, streams that run through the land become hidden, are buried, and sometimes regraded. But now their rediscovery is necessary both to find ways for cities to survive another political failure, climate change, as it is to rediscover the past and perhaps an identity around which to come together once more.
I Hate Politics is brought to you by UMBC's Political Science Program, where you'll learn to shape public policy, impact communities, and function at the center of modern society. Learn more at shadygrove.umbc.edu.
I Hate Politics is a podcast about our neighborhoods, workplaces, schools and streets, and our local governments as they function in diverse and democratic societies. This means our politics are messy, dirty, sometimes corrupt, with often self-serving politicians. But no matter how much we may hate politics, we are never exempt from it, even when we refuse to participate. In fact, the purpose of politics is to keep society moving, precisely when we don't agree with each other, like now. Music for this episode comes from Jackie and the Treehorns, who are a Alexandria, Virginia-based alt-rock band. Stephen Rubin and Pam Long on vocals, guitars, and piano. Frank Caputo on bass and synth. And Brian Gibson on the drums.
The secrets we keep, exposing what's underneath. Do you have something to hide, or is it just your food?
David Ramos, it's long anticipated, but welcome to I Hate Politics.
I am delighted to be here. Appreciate the show, appreciate the role that you're filling for Maryland and around the region now. I get to talk to you about DC as well. And it's always a wonderfully entertaining show with good people on. So I'm flattered that I get to be one of those people.
Thank you. Let's start with the most basic question. What are lost streams?
That lost stream is some watercourse that was once flowing on the surface of our planet somewheres that is now gone. And if you lose something, is something really lost if you don't know if it was there? If we draw the floor as the beginning of European settlement in our region, in DC, that's the 1700s for dense settlement, then a lost stream is something that was flowing in maybe the founding of at the time of the founding of the District of Columbia in 1791, and has since gone away.
Why would streams be lost?
Simplest reason is you might want to put a house where the stream is. Strictly, DC was a marsh, not a swamp. So a swamp is a wetland with trees. And if you look at the natural history of DC, strictly, there are not a lot of places where there are wetlands with trees. Some, not a lot. We don't have a ton of swamps in our part of the world. We do have a lot of wetlands, places where you have grassy or brushy vegetation and wet ground. Those are marshes. DC also has hills and dry ground It has wet, low-lying ground down by tidal rivers. And then in between, there are a series of creeks, sometimes big creeks like Rock Creek, sometimes quite small ones that might dry up as in the height of summer, but creeks and streams that drain the high ground, and those might have been fringed by marshes or bogs. And those are the ones that generally have to go away if you want a city in that same spot.
This morning, I saw a picture of the Lincoln Memorial when it was built, and nothing else was built around it. And it literally looked as if they had built a monument in the middle of a swamp.
You're talking about a photograph. If we imagine it, there's the Lincoln Memorial, the splash of white in the background, and a little bit of horizon. And in front, there's very clearly grass-like vegetation coming out of an area that's shiny because it's wet. It's this moment when that spot in Washington, D.C. is changing from a wet, marshy spot into something much more manicured and carefully managed, which is nowadays probably the site of a reflecting pool. It captures this idea that Washington, D.C. is this very heavily engineered environment, that in order to have these symbolic buildings, things that have meaning across for the whole country.
But we don't think about the streams we lost. Give me some examples of where of streams in DC where you have found.
I get around DC by every mode possible. By this point, car, boat, walk, but I'm mostly on a bike. And if you're on a bike, you start to notice the terrain, because hills, you don't like hills. Well, you love hills. You'll go down the hills, but going up the hills is a problem. And going across hills is sort of a mixed bag, because you go down and then you have to go back up. And one of the spots that happens is Sherman Avenue, right in the middle of Washington, D.C. There's a V-shaped valley there. It's not so noticeable most of the time, but you do notice if you have to bike up the other side. And I got to wonder, why is there this little valley down the middle of Sherman? And it turns out, if you dig around on maps, older maps, you can confirm that, yeah, there was a stream valley going down the middle of, there was a stream flowing down the course of Sherman Avenue. That's one little place. And if you start to notice little ups and downs in DC, it might be as little as 10 feet, 20 feet. The odds are pretty good that those changes in relief have some history. Those little depressions can be a clue that something was there.
So you can look at a topographical map and you see the relief, and from that you can determine that there was a possible lost stream at this location.
I've worked with the DC Department of Energy and Environment and with an environmental engineering firm, Strong Environmental, on a project to map the city's lost streams. And we took a whole range of inputs. One of them was maps. The city is where it is because of access to navigable waterways. We're at the limit of tide. We're at the highest point that an ocean-going ship can squeeze its way up the Potomac. And we're at a point where slightly below where the inland waters, the Potomac River pushing out west, ceases to be navigable. There's a barrier to navigation at Great Falls. And also, there are good sites, there's good waterfalls with sites for grist mills and springs that can bring fresh water to a growing city. The earliest maps of DC, which are André Ellicott, Pierre L'Enfant, about 1791, they show those springs and streams. And then the maps of DC stopped showing springs and streams for about 50, 80 years because no one cares about that. We get good cadastral maps that show where the boundaries of property are because you need to divide and sell the property. And you get tolerable maps of streets so that people can find their way around these properties that you've built and sold. But the streams, they're in the background. And it's not till 1861 that we get a good map that shows streams. And we don't get more of them until about 1891.
Why do we get a good map of streams in 1861?
This is a wild story. There's a character named Albert Boschke. He's a German immigrant. Showed up to the United States from Germany, and he found a job with the United States Coast Survey. U.S. Coast Survey still exists. They still operate. Its successor agencies are now part of NOAA. In 1820s, people have to carry lengths of high precision metal bars around so you can actually measure the distances between sites. People have to hack their way through the countryside, clearing brush and trees in order to measure the lines. This is an expensive endeavor. It requires mosquitoes and risk and work, sweat. Why do you do that? Well, one of the answers is you make maps and charts of the coastline so ships can navigate. It's about the only case for doing this at any level of precision. So the U.S. Coast Survey emerges very early, and they hired on cartographers, surveyors, engineers, draftsmen. One of them, Albert Boschke. And Albert Boschke seems to have been a remarkably talented, driven individual who had made this observation while working for the Coast Survey as a draftsman here in DC, that there isn't a good topographic map of the district. So what does he do? He sets out on his own, using his own time and his own money, to hire surveyors to go out and map the District of Columbia, even taking distance measurements right there on the ground. So it's a high precision map, about as good as you could get at the time. And he does this at his own expense, at his own time. He completes the map on his own in 1857, just of downtown DC, and then he makes a much broader version showing the whole of the district a few years later, finished 1861. If you think about what's going on in the District of Columbia, suddenly the whereabouts of hills and streams and water crossings and natural barriers in the District of Columbia get to be really important in 1861 because the country's gone to war against itself. And the federal government tries to buy the map from the engravers who Albert Boschke is partnered with. They offer a lowball deal. It's, as I understand it, the Secretary of War, Edwin Stanton, is behind this, and they lowball him. There is an incident where a squad of soldiers gets sent by Edwin Stanton to seize the plates for the map, and they take possession of the map from the engravers, either because it's a military secret or because Edwin Stanton likes to play hardball and he has the means to do this now. Eventually, Boschke gets, I think the sum is $8,500, which is a lot of money, but probably not what the map was worth. And he finds, I think he dies in California, and he has, however, left us with his first magnificent record of a district, which is a work of art. There's individual houses engraved on it in position. There are trees. I'm assuming the trees are not in position, but the trees are individual. Someone had to go there with a sharp metal implement and etch a little circle for each of those trees. And it is precise, it is well crafted, it's easy to read, and it's the only thing of its kind for the period.
Well, for $8,500, that's a steal.
I feel badly for the guy.
Wow. I mean, you go up against Edwin Stanton at your own peril. So the Sherman Avenue stream, is that in Boschke?
Sherman Avenue does show up in Boschke. It's part of a much bigger network of streams called the prosaic original name is Goose Creek. I'm a fan of Goose Creek, but in DC's ambitious days, someone very quickly renames it Tiber after the river in Rome, which is a little excessively grand. Yeah.
Between 1861 and now, we lost that stream, Goose Creek, Tiber, whatever you call it. And so you go in there, and you and the engineering company go in there and try to, figure out this is a stream. The topographically, this is the lowest point there, and should have had a stream and does have a stream, and this is what it connects. So you have all this information. You have a DOE, which is Department of Energy and Environment in DC, that you have a grant from them to do all of this. Now what?
Well, I'll interject here. The figure is 70%. It's about 70% of the streams that were flowing in the mid-19th century are gone today.
Wow.
3 out of 4 streams gone today. More precise way to put that is of the linear length of a stream, the distance that water flows in the channel, 70% of the linear length of the streams are gone.
Oh, so that's interesting. So it's not the entire stream that goes away, but it's parts of streams that go away. And then the rest of it is like diverted into, I don't know, into channels to feed directly into the into the river system. How does it? How did that happen?
Sometimes water actually genuinely goes away, especially with changes to rainfall patterns and water being diverted into sanitary sewers or storm drains. Water really does go away. But there's still water flowing and it has to go somewhere. A project funded by DC DOEE, which started because someone west of the park, so someone in, I think, Ward 3, part of her backyard fell into an unmarked culvert, an unmarked, hitherto unknown culvert that was carrying runoff. The council member then, for representing this homeowner, managed to get into the DC budget bill funding to map lost streams. So there's a practical import here, which is that knowing about the whereabouts of lost streams might give us some idea about where we should be alert to the existence of unknown culverts.
I assume that a lot of this work that you're doing is directly now related to stormwater management, which is, front and center in environmental protection, in term, sort of building, not building in flood zones, having, and as water level rises, and, climate change happens, that, we have to be more mindful of where water could be getting in. And so we have to be careful about construction. So all those things are coming together in this project. Could you speak about those connections?
I live in Lanier Heights, which is it's part of Adams Morgan, right near the zoo. And there's a street near me where there was a stream and a road, which must have been a very difficult road to traverse because it would have been nearly on top of the stream. But that particular spot, it has to be under 30, 40, 45 feet of fill dirt. And there's no stream there anymore. There is a sewer that carries some amount of both effluent from houses and the runoff that goes down storm drains. But 45 feet of fill has erased the stream bed. Part of it is actually higher than its surroundings now. And that particular stream is a memory, but it doesn't bring with itself increased flooding risk. However, there's a truism in people who are doing landscape history work that water wants to be where it once was. I think that you can overstate that. Sometimes water wants to be where it once was because the low spots where water was often are still there. And what lost streams tell us is they give us an idea of where the water was and might still be again, unless somebody has dramatically altered the relief and filled in a stream valley or cut off a stream well above its headwater. We talked about Tiber Creek earlier, which was this very large stream draining the middle of the city. And it flowed from more or less the old soldiers' home down through Bloomingdale, past Union Station, and then turned west and entered the Potomac at about the Washington Monument. That's the mouth of Tiber Creek is the wide body of water whose last remnant is in that photograph of the Lincoln Memorial. Tiber Creek's changed. There is a major sewer, goes back to about 1875, 1880, called the Northeast Boundary Sewer, which takes both sewage and stormwater runoff from a huge swath of the northeastern part of the district and directs it into the Anacostia. So that engineering change, the construction of a sewer tunnel, has altered the flow. And I think that between that and subsequent changes and grade changes, very little water is going to continue along the course of the Tiber.
But now we know that those two need to be separated, that effluents need to be treated and stormwater can go, directly into the water system. When you reconstruct all of that, knowledge of lost streams seems to be super important, because how do you do it without knowing that?
Sometimes streams can be a shortcut towards understanding today's risk, yes. And as we're starting to re-engineer water systems, it gives us an idea about what could come for the future. That's powerful, because we can if we put the money into it, we can build almost anything. We have built almost anything. We have built Haynes Point, we have taken mud flats of the Potomac River and turned them into a park, a low-lying park whose future is somewhat unclear. But we can make land where there was no land. But maybe there's power in ceding some of that decision making to history, to natural forces of the past, and trying to let those. Now we're getting to fuzzy territory, but if you believe that water does have a spirit, a memory, some kind of a presence, maybe letting some of that past presence come back to the surface.
This is called daylighting lost streams. So let's talk about daylighting.
Daylighting is a powerful idea because it suggests that we can take the principle from the late 19th century and just gaining steam in the early 20th is that we have to manage water. Water is a problem. It creates flood risk. It might, if you're letting sewage into the water, it contains pathogens. It's just inconvenient because there's a problem with streams in downtown DC in the mid and late 19th century. People just getting drunk and falling into the stream, which sounds funny, but they usually died. This is an incredible way to run a city. And if you do that, you try to make the streams manageable. You put them into a ditch, you put them into a pipe, you put them into a hard concrete channel. And one of the things that engineers and environmental scientists have found is that those streams in a pipe, in a hard concrete channel, they don't support life anymore. Streams get warmer. There's no habitat for aquatic creatures, for plants that would grow in the water, and we lose much of the natural environment from having those hard streams. Stream restoration is powerful because it lets us bring those, we can think of them as resources. We can bring back those natural resources. Trouble with it in the district is that we've built a city on top of those streams. The sites for streams in DC for stream daylighting in DC are relatively few. That stream that's near me in Linear Heights, we can't really rip out a road that's on top of it. There are good sites for stream daylighting in the parks. One of the fortunate features of DC, even more so than this is a feature of many American cities, but DC actually has a well-built-out system of stream valley parks. And oftentimes the streams in those stream valleys are degraded, is the term in the field, degraded or running in a pipe. But there is still water there, and there's land, forested land usually, sometimes open land, publicly owned land that doesn't have buildings on it, where there's the possibility of bringing a stream back.
I'd imagine, though, the planning department has this map that you have now created, right? And so they are going to permit a new development that they would take into account at that time that there is a lost stream underneath, and give at least the developer an opportunity to daylight it within their development plan rather than to just continue the way they had done 100 years.
I think that would be possible. The part of the project for DCDOE involved the environmental engineering firm wrote a report that identified some streams that were good candidates for daylighting. And they took into account many factors, including including feasibility. They assumed that DC wouldn't want to have to purchase land, so they focused on streams that were in publicly held land. But yeah, there is a possibility here of starting to use ideas about where water once was to drive features in future development. I know there is currently underway in a joint project between DC DOE and the National Park Service, a project to redo, I think it's about 15,000 linear feet of stream around Fort DuPont Park. Some of it revegetating and improving impaired stream beds, some of it pulling streams out of culverts.
What are some other candidates around the city that are good examples? Also, people can go visit. It's so the other thing is that we because they are lost, we are disassociated with them now, and so where can we kind of see it without, or imagine it, or take a ghost walk, or whatever?
The poster child for a daylighted stream in Washington, D.C. is a tributary of Broad Branch. So Broad Branch drains a swath of D.C. west of Rock Creek Park. It flows more or less from the area of Chevy Chase and Friendship Heights, dropping down for steeply wooded valleys towards Rock Creek. And the lower reaches around Rock Creek are still free-flowing. This tributary of Broad Branch, about 10 years ago, DOE worked with engineers to come in and rebuild, I think it's about 1,500 linear feet of stream to pull it out of a culvert and bring it to the surface. And there's emergent vegetation showing up. There are plants that look like they belong in a healthy Chesapeake Bay region coastal plain stream. It's kind of wonderful. And it's public land. You can actually go visit it. It's the cross street is roughly Linallen Avenue. And it looks to me like one of the prettier spots in that part of the world.
Having studied this history, having looked at all of this, are there some places, some maybe flood zones, some riverbeds, stream courses, where, in your view, we should not build anymore?
We live in an unusual region. The Chesapeake Bay is allegedly the third largest estuary in the world. It's a remarkably productive place on migratory pathways for animals of all kinds. And those animals, they all depend upon things like those shallow tidal wetlands. DC was home to, if you go east of DC, you can go to a place on the Patuxent River called Jug Bay. It's mostly protected. It's entirely protected. It's between the state of Maryland and now federal agencies. And in fact, there's a massive new national wildlife refuge complex being spun up along the lower Patuxent River. It's an extraordinary thing. I didn't know that this was possible. But that place is fringed with marshes, with areas of wild rice, with slow-flowing tidal rivers that are rich in life and great for recreation, great for the spirit, and home to vital for species that have economic value, like the blue crab. And we've ripped all of that out in DC to build cities, mostly to build channels that will carry sewage farther away, and to build parkland like East Potomac Park, West Potomac Park, Haynes Point, and Anacostia Park, which are well used and well loved, but mostly just wide open field. And I think there's room to take those parks, especially along the Anacostia, and build them into something that honors nature, something that has habitat value, something that allows for passive recreation, for boating, swimming, that looks pretty in a way that maybe the current wide open fields don't. Another way you could go, and this is an issue along the Anacostia River parks, you could declare some of those lands surplus, and you could build on them. And there's value to that too, that we're in a city that you could build in places that are maybe near transit, but not especially near transit. They're not, one of the problems of these spaces is that they're relatively isolated for DC, but you're still in the middle of the metro area. Maybe there's value in building housing there and building new developments in a place that's there rather than, say, far out in Loudoun County or way out somewhere beyond Frederick. But I think that we're in such a special spot that the best use of that land is return to nature or manage nature. And the trick is it's all in the floodplain. It's all it's low-lying land that without considerable engineering investment would be at risk in a hurricane and will be at greater risk in even just day-to-day flooding.
Which reminds me, what is the risk in DC of reverse flooding into the sewers?
If a wind is blowing, you might get a couple of feet of water. And if it comes on top of one of these king tides, you might get water lapping over the bulkhead on something like Haynes Point and into a low-lying development along the Anacostia River if you do what I don't want you to do and you instead build on that land. And fortunately, this is a recognized problem. One of the risks is that water can back up. And you see it in a place like Cambridge, Maryland, where the water backs up and it bubbles out of a manhole or a catch basin much farther inshore. And the way you can prevent that is with tide gates. This is a known problem. There's a good inventory of the district sewer infrastructure from 1957, and much of the energy that the engineering firm doing that inventory spent was in going down sewers and looking at key critical control structures, including those tide gates that prevent water from backing up. Of course, if you shut the tide gate, one of the risks is that tide gates work both ways. The water won't flow into the sewer, but water won't flow out of the sewer. So you do have a lesser problem caused by the low-lying sewer system. DC Water is getting around this. The DC Water has, as in compliance with a consent decree, embarked upon the construction of a massive sewer system, a new lower level sewer system to take water off that would have flowed through overflows into the Potomac River and instead get that water to the sewage treatment plant down at Blue Plains. The new CSO tunnels covering the Anacostia Basin are in commission and have almost entirely eliminated sewer overflows. So you can build your way around this tide gate problem, but I don't think it's worth it. I think for a low-lying place like Anacostia Park, let it be wild.
David Ramos, thank you for undertaking this project, for thinking about lost streams, and thinking about daylighting. I hope you'll be back.
This has been a delight.
That's all for this episode of I Hate Politics, where we aim to stem the decline in local news by working with community voices. Don't forget to tune in to our Tuesday morning news analyses. I Hate Politics is produced by me, Sunil Dasgupta, and assistant producer, Adama Gay, with support from the University of Maryland, Baltimore County. I direct UMBC's political science program at the universities at Shady Grove in Montgomery County, where, among other things, we explore and learn about politics, government, and society close to home. Music for this episode comes from Alexandria, Virginia alt-rock band, Jackie and the Treehorns, Steve Rubin and Pam Long on vocals, guitars, and piano, Frank Caputo on bass and synth, and Brian Gibson on drums. If you want to share your music on the show or know someone else who might want to, please email us at producer@ihbpod.org. I hope you will subscribe, share, and rate the podcast as we bring you stories about politics close to you and to your home. See you next time.
Can't win for losing. They gotta keep some time and I'll be front page news. I tell you what, I've got nothing more to lose. I might be too much for you to explain. My own persistence as immortal remains.